Good morning. This is Pastor Stewart Waterhouse. Today we're going to talk about NSPM-7, and it's an executive order. We'll also talk about Executive Order 14188, um, and we'll talk about FARA, that's FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act. And I'm going to talk about all this as to how it fits into the disposition matrix or the kill list. Big Island. We have wild goats, and unfortunately, the government has always sought to eradicate them. I love these animals, and I do believe that by now they have formed a niche that is actually beneficial for our environment, but I'm getting off point. They were originally brought here by Captain Cook and is given as a gift on the Big Island. From there, they spread everywhere. And they spread into Volcano National Park. So back in the 1920s, 1930s, somewhere in there, the federal government decided to eradicate the goats. And at first they could shoot a few out on the open lava fields, but most of the goats stayed hid pretty well. And so what they did is they used the Judas Goat concept in order to find the herds and shoot them. So they took a goat and they put a radio tracking collar on the goat, and then they painted the goat orange so that they wouldn't accidentally, well, they dyed the fur, so they wouldn't accidentally shoot their own goat. And then they just released them in the lava field. Now, goats are herd animals. They hate being alone. And the poor goat was terrified being released alone in the middle of the field, And so he just ran in a straight line, or she ran in a straight line. They had several of them. Smelling the air, listening with their ears for the sound of another goat. And of course, they were bleating very loud. Bah, bah, hoping for an answer until they finally find one. And then they'd find a herd to join. Small little herd that would hide just inside a lava tube to get out of the rain or out of the hot sun or out of sight from the people that were trying to hunt them. But then, of course, with the radio tracking collar, they could get on horseback right up to the herd and then shoot them all. Later on, they used helicopters, and they're still using helicopters for that purpose. But they've eradicated most of them in the national park. We still have goats in the side slope of Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa, and Hululai. But back to the national park, they would shoot all the goats except for their Judas Goat, who now found all his new friends dead and would go running looking for another herd. And then, of course, when he found another herd, they would again, using the tracking collar, find the goat and then shoot that herd too. And this would go on for 3 or 4 herds. It was a very effective way of finding all the goat herds and eradicating them. Of course, it was very disconcerting for the Judas Goat because every time his new friends would die and he didn't know what was wrong. So it was very disturbing for him. The people that were participating in this wrote in their notes about how disturbing it was to the Judas Goat after 3 or 4 finding herds and then them all ending up dead. But, our intelligence agencies use the same thing today. Not just like in the movie Red Dawn, and in the movie we had the Patriots resisting the invading forces, and the invading forces couldn't find the source of resistance. So they implanted a tracking chip into one Patriot and released a Patriot who then went back to his fellow Patriots, and then they were able to come in force and kill the resistance. But just not like in the movie, what they do today, they don't have to put a tracking device on you. Instead, they would mark your cell phone SIM card to know to track your cell phone, or perhaps just track your vehicle. As we stated in the last video, part 1 of the kill list, that they could track the tire pressure gauges on your car. So if you have the pressure gauge built into each tire, they'd be able to track you. And they would send a drone to track you. And then you would be the Judas Goat, but you wouldn't know it, because they would be tracking you. They wouldn't be arresting you. They wouldn't be killing you, but they would be tracking you to your friends and then neutralizing your friends. And of course, our government has a lot of ways, as we're going to get into it, of neutralizing. Number one way right now is financial. They can freeze your bank accounts, freeze your PayPal card, and then of course they can revoke your real ID, so you can't board an airline flight, stranding you. You can't even enter a federal courthouse without the real ID. Buy liquor, go to a commercial boat dock. All of these things are prohibited without real ID. So the government has a range of options, and even most concerning, the kill list of the Disposition Matrix was designed under Obama for foreign terrorists. And after 9/11, I think everybody agrees we have foreign terrorists that become a problem. And we can argue to what extent did we create those terrorists versus were they really terrorists. I mean, it's hard to see just a goat herder in the middle of Afghanistan as being any threat to the United States. But, well, we won't get into all that. But what we will get into is that under the Disposition Matrix, as we found out in part 1, the U.S. government started targeting Americans, U.S. citizens. And from there, then, it was still designed for foreign terrorists. But as the government wanted to target Americans on American soil, then comes along an executive order, NSPM-7. That's NSPM-7. And what that does is it allows the executive branch, that is the president or his officials, to designate domestic groups as terrorist groups. I'm talking about Americans. I'm talking about without trial. Okay, this is extrajudicial. If they want to accuse somebody of a crime, they can arrest them for the crime, put them on trial, send them to jail. And if they really are domestic terrorists, of course, but we're talking about now something that you cannot challenge in the court because it's outside of the courts. It's in the sole prerogative of the executive branch to list your organization as a terrorist organization, which you may be affiliated with, such as Antifa. But it doesn't stop with Antifa. NSPM-7 was originally designed in order to target Antifa, but now it can target anti-abortion protesters. It can target any type of political dissidents. It just labels them as a domestic terrorist. And, and what's concerning is under congressional testimony, the executive branch has repeatedly refused to rule out the use of lethal force against this so-called domestic terrorists, American citizens, used without trial. As far as the constitutional clause guaranteeing due process, the whole idea is that this due process, according to the administration, is satisfied by the heads of the various U.S. intelligence agencies that get together periodically to label an organization or an individual under NSPM-7 as a terrorist or a terrorist organization. And that is all your due process is. There's no right to confront the accuser against you. Yeah, it's totally unconstitutional. But they claim it is constitutional, and as we saw under the Disposition Matrix, the courts are not going to interfere because the federal government, the executive branch, will say, well, but this is national security, and it's classified, and therefore the courts don't have the information necessary to interfere, so they just say it's out of our jurisdiction because we don't deal in political affairs. So your life hangs on a thread called by our courts as a political affair, which you're not going to interfere, solely then in the executive branch. So this is scary. Under SPM-7, for example, let's talk about some of the things that have happened. take, for example, the use of the U.S. military to blow up boats suspected of being drug running boats, in the ocean. And many of these crew members on these boats are actually Americans, especially if they really are drug running, which we have to take the government's word for that. And I do agree with the whole idea of a concept of war against drugs. That's absolutely necessary. I think drugs is ruining our country. But I do also believe in constitutional rights. If these are Americans on these boats, and if they especially are drug runners, they're probably Americans because the cartels want to use Americans because the American passport opens doors for them. Okay, maybe not the full crew, but at least one or two on that crew may be American. Now, the problem is once this boat is blown out of the water, any survivors still in the water under the Geneva Convention and under international maritime law are now safe because they no longer represent a threat. They're no longer carting the drugs. They're no longer carting guns. They're no longer manning a gun, whatever it be. They're no longer a threat. So under the international treaties and under our Constitution, the international treaty is the supreme law of the land. So it violates the U.S. Constitution to do second strikes and even third strike follow up. And yet they're doing that. Any survivors in the water, they're coming in a second strike and killing those survivors. And of course, the reason they do this is because you don't want a survivor, if you're the federal government, to be picked up by another passing merchant ship who might spill the beans and say we weren't running drugs at all, or we were all Americans. So they want to cover it all up by just killing everybody, including violating the Constitution. And so what's important about this violation under the Constitution is when the federal government under NSPM-7 refused to say that this excludes the use of lethal force against Americans on American soil, then you can bet your bottom dollar it is being used against Americans on American soil, lethal force, without any constitutional concerns. If it didn't concern them on these boats, which even though they were outside of, most of them were outside of U.S. jurisdiction in the international waters, then it's also what they do on American soil, unconstitutional. There's no difference. Okay? So they're operating outside of the Constitution, and the courts aren't involved because it's extrajudicial. It's because they're not charged with the crime. Instead, they're designated as a domestic terrorist. Okay? Under NSPM-7. And, if you're lucky, they're only freezing your PayPal account and harassing you. If you're unlucky, they're going to kidnap you, take you, rendition you out of the country to a black site where you can be tortured. Okay? And if you're even more unlucky, you're going to be used as a Judas Goat. They won't even touch you, but they're going to track everywhere you go, everybody you know, find all your associates, even though they're not committing a crime, but use you to kill the herd or to freeze the PayPal accounts of the herd or whatever they're going to do to the herd. Hopefully, they're going to arrest and put them on trial because maybe they are criminals. This may be used again. There are real things as terrorists, too. But, of course, we know that they're classifying political dissent as terrorists. Okay? That's the problem. And now, and the problem is I believe in the Constitution. These people have a right to confront their accuser and to be proved as breaking the law, not just deemed to have. I believe in the court system, even if the court system failed me because the court didn't believe in the U.S. Constitution or refused to uphold my constitutional rights. Nonetheless, that is supposed to be, and we hope it works in some cases. At least it makes it harder for the government to just simply kill us if it's in the court. Okay, so we hope it goes to the court. Now, what is a domestic terrorist? And then now comes in another executive order that I find very interesting, and that is 14188. That's 14188. And under this executive order, anti-Semitism is synonymous with anti-Americanism. And unfortunately, the definition they use for anti-Semitism blurs the lines between anti-Zionism and hate groups. Because, of course, criticizing Israel for the genocide Israel's doing in Gaza, and now extending that to southern Lebanon, is considered anti-Americanism. I don't know how, because this is Israel, a foreign country. But under Executive Order 14188, then it becomes anti-Americanism to criticize Israel, because that then is deemed to be anti-Semitic. And once you're labeled anti-Americanism, then you can be designated as a terrorist group. So yeah, what you post on Facebook, if that's all you're doing, you may get away with it. But if you're an NGO or you're a political dissident, then they may use what you post on Facebook against you, because you're no longer a minuscule guppy fish. You're now kind of a bigger fish. And remember, the government, sometimes they target the big fish. Sometimes they just target the little fish. Why? Because you can catch a whole lot of little fish. Getting a big fish is harder. Although certainly it's the big fish that makes the news, and all the little fish, they don't make the news. But you may be a little fish, see? And then you could just be lethally terminated, killed, murdered by your own government without any court review. Just on executive order because you criticized Israel. Or you were a political dissident, of whatever activity you are, holding protests, let alone Antifa went beyond protest with some riots. But, because you participated in a riot, which you may not have been the one to throw the rocks through the window, but you were there holding a sign or whatever. Do you deserve to be renditioned out of the U.S. to a black site where you can be tortured? Under the Disposition Matrix, under NSPM-7, under Executive Order 14188. And it gets worse, okay? Because a lot of NGOs have an international footprint. I mean, my chaplaincy organization, I also have an international footprint. I have a website hosted in Switzerland. I have a Swiss phone number. I have a Swiss mailing address, Swiss email, Proton Mail, because it's encrypted. And so I have a footprint in Switzerland. Now, Foreign Agent Registration Act. We think in our mind, and this is incorrect, this is absolutely wrong, but we think this means somebody who's speaking on behalf of a foreign government. Yes, it does include that, but that is not the definition, okay? It doesn't just mean because you're spreading propaganda on behalf of China or you're representing the interest of Russia or Sudan or Yemen or whatever, Saudi Arabia. No, it means that there is an entity in another country, which may be your own entity that you founded, giving you the ability to work internationally on behalf of human rights, which is what I do, or on behalf of whatever angle you're doing, say right to life, champion the unborn, champion women against rape, whatever it is. If you fall in to a category where you become a political dissident and you have that office or that presence in another country, then you could fall into when you do activity in the United States, such as posting on Facebook or X or something, but you have that international presence, such as I do, you could, if you're not very careful, fall into FARA. And then FARA, they could criminal prosecute you. Yes, that's better than being lethal force and executing you. But you could go to jail for 5 years for posting an anti-Semitic genocide of what's happening in Gaza on your Facebook because you had a foreign presence and didn't represent that you were a foreign agent, which you're really not, but that's just the way they interpret it, see? So you have to be very careful nowadays. This is what they do. And you could be murdered and killed for it, too. Okay? All without any court review. You could just be drones following you forever because you might be that goat and the Judas Goat, and they're just trying to track everybody in the organization you're associated with or that you just may be friends with, in order to catch all the small fish, and they're just ignoring you. And once that organization is defunct because they financially destroyed it, then they still track you because they know your mindset is that of a dissident, or your mindset is that of a certain political persuasion, or you can't help yourself. You're going to criticize the murder of children in the Middle East, but they know you're going to do that. So they know you're going to join another organization. And so you're a Judas Goat till they've destroyed one organization after another because of your association, and you never knew it. Because they didn't arrest you. They didn't rendition you for torture. They didn't contact you. They didn't question you. You were just oblivious. But they tracked you because you were the Judas Goat designated. You weren't painted physically with orange like that goat, but your SIM card in their computer, was red flagged, right? Or your car, or your cell phone, or both, or other devices that can track. And so this is what they're doing. And yeah, so under the FARA laws, FARA is misused to quash political dissidents. The executive order criticizing Israel the same as anti-Semitic, which it's not. You're criticizing the practice of killing children in the Middle East by Israel is not the same as being anti-Jewish. Okay, you're not hate speech. You're defending children. But they can deem it that, see? And then say you're anti-American. And then as anti-American, they can take your whole group and deem it as being a domestic terrorist organization. And then once that's done, they can use soft options, medium options, or even lethal options. You could be added to a kill list. So this is very concerning. This is happening right now. In part one, I gave you names. And, in part one of the kill list, disposition matrix we discussed, it wasn't used just against terrorists and criminals, including Americans, but it could be used just because of what you happen to know. Okay? In other words, preemptively, because you happen to know something that's a state secret. And, well, what if the KGB were to kidnap you, the Russians or the Iranians or whoever, China? What if they were to kidnap you and then torture you to get these secrets out of you, see? Just because of what you knew. Maybe whatever kind of secrets, right? Tech secrets, geographic secrets, history secrets, classified secrets, whatever. Even though you were cleared for that classified information and you were doing it under the course of your normal duty on behalf of the U.S. government, but somebody in the upper intelligence agency says, he's a risk for us because if he were to be kidnapped. You see, so then you could be added to that disposition matrix and kidnapped yourself by your own government preemptively and killed because of what you know. It doesn't have to be real criminal activity, see? And that's what NSPM-7, which expands the disposition matrix directly to include domestic so-called terrorists, right? And then you add the Executive Order 14188, which includes criticism of Israel being reinterpreted as anti-Semitic, being therefore the equivalent of being anti-American. Wow, this is a really cold chill on free speech, on the free practice of religion, on the democratic political debate in our country. Aren't we supposed to have a debate on, some views say, oh, the war against Iran is justified. Other views say, let's hold on a minute. Let's really examine this more thoroughly. Was Iran really a danger to U.S. interest, or are we doing this on behalf of a foreign government? You see, so there should be some healthy debate. That's what the democracy is. But under the system is set up now, if the president doesn't want debate on the subject, he can just have his opponents politically killed. And it's happening. Okay, you are warned. I am telling you. My next video will be part 3. Please tune in, because on part 3, well, on part 3, I'm going to really bring it home, okay? Thank you. This is Pastor Stewart Waterhouse. It was 10 minutes after midnight. Good night.